Today I am doing something that I didn't think I would be doing at this stage in the game. I am going to show you how I make sourdough bread. Now, why am I showing you this, or why am I a little uncomfortable showing this, is that I am a beginner at making bread. And when I say a beginner, before I started my sourdough journey, I had never even baked a loaf of bread. So one of my friends was making sourdough and she loved it and she said, "You can do this." And she came here one day and showed me how to do it, brought me some starter, and I'm about 20 loaves in my sourdough baking journey. So I thought maybe it would help some people who feel the way I felt before I got into this to know that you do not have to be an expert. It's really not that complicated. It's very forgiving. It's just more of an extended process than making regular bread. So if you're still interested, if you're interested in seeing how I do it, stay along for the journey, stay right up until the end, and I'll show you, I will cut into my cooled down bread to show you exactly how this batch turned out. First off, you don't need a lot of fancy equipment, or you don't need any fancy equipment to make some sourdough bread. All you really need is a really large bowl, because it does kind of get fairly large in size. And the rest is just, extra if you want to. It all came in a kit. It's like to sprinkle flour, a bench scraper, a bowl scraper, and some banneton baskets, which I will explain a little bit later on. That was like, these items were like a set that came together, and I will also link that in the description below. I didn't buy them right away. I wanted to make sure that I liked making sourdough before I made any kind of purchases. The first thing that you need in your sourdough journey is your starter. I haven't made my starter yet, so this is still the starter that my friend gave me. I feed it diligently, and when I'm not using it, it's stored in the fridge. So that's a different process as well. I will put a lot of the details in the description below. So this is my starter. So when you're making bread, you need to feed your starter. So I've been feeding it. I fed it yesterday morning, last night, and again today. When you feed your starter before making your bread, you have to give it a good 4 to 5 hours to at least, really activate. And you can see that there's movement. You can see that there's bubbles in there. You can see that my starter is active and it's ready to make my bread. So another way that you can test your starter to see if it's ready is the float test. All you need to do is take a little bit of your starter, drop it in some water, and if it floats, that means it's ready to make your bread. So as you can see, my starter is floating, so I am ready to bake some bread. One more tool that I haven't mentioned as well that kind of makes this a whole lot easier is having a kitchen scale. So everything is done by grams. If you don't have a kitchen scale, I will put in the description below the equivalents, hopefully in cups if I can kind of figure it out. Let's get going. I'm going to measure my ingredients in a bowl, and it's very simple. There's only 4 ingredients when you're making sourdough bread. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put your bowl on this kitchen scale and bring it to 0. So you can measure exactly how many grams of each ingredient you're putting in. So I start with adding my flour, and I use 2 flours. I use a whole wheat flour and I use a white flour. You can experiment with different flours as well. So I put about 150 grams of the whole wheat flour, and then I bring the rest up to 1,000 grams. So 850 grams is the white flour. So I'm almost there. So now I'm going to add 850 grams of the white flour. So now remember to bring your scale back to 0. And now I'm going to add 20 grams of salt. I use a sea salt. I just sprinkle that in. Now this is where it gets a little bit interesting, is when you're adding your water and your starter. So you can add as little as a 60% ratio of water, which would be around 600 grams, or you can go up as high as an 80% hydration, which would be 800 grams of water added to your flour. The only thing you need to remember is the more water you add to your flour, the stickier it's going to be and the harder it is going to be to work with. But the advantage of having a higher hydration bread or dough is that it creates a much fluffier, a much airier sourdough bread, and that's really kind of what you're looking for in the final product. For me, my sweet spot is at about 750 grams of water, so a 75% hydration. I may try to work myself up to 800, but I am getting results that I'm happy with at 750 grams. So that is my sweet spot for water. My sweet spot for the starter for me is at 170 grams of starter. With these proportions, I've been able to produce some pretty decent loaves of bread. So that's what I'm adding in. So you can kind of play around. That's why I say it's not that complicated. You can adjust some of the ingredients a little bit, but as long as you stay within those percentages, it'll work. I will put the recipe that I use in the description below with the exact measurements that I use. I do hope I'm not making this sound complicated because it really isn't. So now adding 750 grams of water. I put lukewarm water, putting my scale back to 0, and finally 170 grams of the starter. The rest of this is going in the fridge because I won't be making any more bread for probably a couple weeks. I've made about 6 loaves recently, just trying to stockpile this. You don't really need to have that much left. As long as you have somewhere around 50 grams to start another loaf, that's pretty much all you need. I could stop here if I wanted. I'm at 165, but I'm going to bring it up to 170 for good measure. Now, if you have made sourdough in the past and this is not how you do it, and you might be thinking, wait a minute, Theresa, what are you doing? You're not supposed to add your starter right away. You're supposed to let it sit before adding your starter. You're supposed to mix all the other ingredients and only add your starter after, and so on and so forth. I have seen other people do it this way, adding all their ingredients all at once. This is what I have been doing pretty much right from the start, and it's been working for me. If you want to do it the other way, adding your flour, water, and salt, letting it sit, which is called autolyse, and then adding your starter a little bit after, maybe 30 minutes, go ahead. I haven't had any issues at all doing it the way I've been doing it. I seem to be having really nice loaves of bread. Doing it this way and adding all the ingredients together at once. So it's up to you how you decide to proceed. I just like to keep it simple and just add all the ingredients. And now we're going to bring all this together, stirring it well. Once you have all your ingredients mixed well, we're going to let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes. So just to give you an idea, like this is a very wet and sticky dough. So I just cover it with a damp cloth and let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes. So now we've had our first 30-minute rest period. So this is when we start to really work the dough. And you don't, it's not like regular bread. You don't, how is it called? Boulanger? Yeah. You don't need the bread. It's more like a series. It's called stretch and folds. There are different techniques that you can do. I've seen people do more like a slab and fold. I've tried it. It was not pretty. So I have finally found the technique that works best for me, and it's to do the stretch and folds. So let me show you how that's done. So as you can see, the dough is still very sticky. Now, do not add any flour at this point. If you're having too much trouble handling the dough, you can lightly mist your hands with water, but otherwise don't add flour. So I use this like a bowl scraper to kind of help me get my hands underneath, at least to start. So we want to do 4 stretch and folds. So what it looks like, and it's a stretch and fold, is grab this to help me lift it from the bottom of the bowl. And then you just gently lift and fold. And you do a quarter turn. And again, stretch and fold. And you're going to see that every time we do this, because we have to do this 4 times at 30-minute intervals, your dough is getting more textured, more structure. So we just do it 4 times. Don't overdo the process. So you do a series of 4 stretch and folds. And as you can see, it's very sticky. And then you let it sit again for another 30 minutes. And we're going to do this process 4 times. So this was number 1. Time for round 2. The dough is already looking better. So again, a series of stretch and folds. Don't tear it. We're building structure to our dough. It's just a nice stretch and you flip it over. This is the final round of our stretch and fold. As always, be gentle with your dough. You don't want to release any of those bubbles and the structure that we're trying to build. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're just going to stretch it, don't tear it, and flip it over. As you can see, each time it's getting easier and easier to manipulate, to pull. It's pulling further apart from the bowl. Building structure. It's coming along nicely. Okay, so what's next? We've gotten our 4 sessions of stretch and fold. So now we're going to do what we call a bulk rise. So you're just going to leave it alone and let it rise. What you're looking for is for your dough to double in size. This usually happens, it probably takes somewhere around 4 hours, maybe sometimes a little bit less, it could be a little bit more. So just, keep an eye, you want it to double in size. Listen, I have taken this dough and basically left it for 6-7 hours because there was somewhere I had to be and I was gone for longer than expected. Got back, the dough was perfect. So don't worry if you have to leave it longer, but make sure you leave it long enough to make sure that it does double in size. Now I know what you're thinking, it's a lot of steps, and maybe it is a lot of steps, but it does give you some time to do other tasks while you're at it. For example, I've been preparing my green beans to make my spicy dill beans, so I've got my jars stuffed. All I need to do is pour in my liquid. I've been dehydrating some summer savory. I've got my supper cooking. So I've got lots of things going on as well. So it's not as if, you're constantly at it. It does give you time to do something else. So if it's cool in your kitchen, what you can do with your bread as well is that you can put it in the oven with your oven light on, and this will create, surprisingly, a lot of warmth inside of your oven, or maybe not a lot, but enough that you're going to feel a different temperature inside of your oven with the light on. So you can do this as well if it's a little bit cooler in your kitchen than it should be. Otherwise, we leave it and we'll check on it again in a few hours. It is finally time to get into the final 2 steps of making our bread. It has risen quite a bit. It's been about 4.5 hours. So now it's time to start with the pre-shape. So we have 2 steps left, the pre-shape and then the final shaping before we store it in the fridge overnight. So let's get into the pre-shape. Let me show you how I do it. So we're going to start by putting out our dough on our countertop, on our surface. And I use this scraper just to get it out. Now you always want to be gentle with your dough at this point. You don't want to deflate any of the nice fermentation going on inside the dough. Once you have it spread out, or once you have it out, this is where you're going to just cut it in half. I have not yet mastered the art of making 2 equal loaves. Someday. I do flour my hands somewhat. So the pre-shaping is very simple, very basic. Just spread it out into a rectangle. And I maybe don't have enough flour, it's sticking a little bit, and then basically just kind of fold it over, and just roll it. And this is why you don't want too much flour, because you still need it to stick together. Same thing with your second loaf. Spread it out into a little bit of a rectangle, always being gentle. Fold it over, it's kind of stuck. Fold it over. Flour your hands. Give it a quick roll. And then you let it rest. Now once more, we need to let this rest for 30 minutes. And I cover it with a damp cloth. Now while this is resting, what we're gonna do is we're gonna prepare our bannetons. So bannetons are basically the proofing baskets. This is where you're going to put your dough to sit in the fridge overnight. You don't cook them in these. This is just to help them proof overnight in the fridge. If it consists of a basket and that it has like a fabric inside, some people do it without the fabric, up to you whether you want to use the fabric or not. To prepare your banneton, you need to generously flour it to make sure that you don't have your dough sticking to the fabric inside your banneton, or if you're not using the fabric, so that it doesn't stick to the inside of the banneton. I didn't have a banneton at first before I decided whether I was going to make sourdough more than once. So what you can use if you don't have a banneton is like a colander, like to drain pasta or to drain anything really. So you would take your colander, place a tea towel inside your colander, and in the same way you're going to flour this like you would your banneton basket. And then once you've got your dough in there and flour the top of your dough, you just flip it over and use it the same way. So if you don't have all the equipment, you can get away with this if you want. One more thing as well that I'd like to mention is that this is actually the jar that I usually use to mix my starter with. Now I don't let this get full. I really keep just a small amount of starter in there, but I like the fact that it's a big jar, and if I want to make more starter quickly without worrying that it's going to bubble over. So I do like it for this, and this is what I purchased off of Amazon. It's actually called a weck jar, W-E-C-K. I'll put the link in the description below. It is now time for the final shaping. We have made it to the end of getting our dough ready. They sneaked back together. For this final shaping, again, you're going to want to use some lightly floured and your hands as well. So what I'm going to start by doing again is kind of creating a rectangle. Again, just gently stretch it, don't tear it, but you can stretch it out a little bit. And then we're going to crisscross again across the top. So this is why as well you don't want to use too much flour because it needs to stick. Once I've crisscrossed my dough, then I'm going to roll it into a nice ball. I'm going to use my bench scraper to gently pick it up. Again, with the second dough, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. Crisscross along the length of the dough. I love to see those bubbles, and then just roll it up. Now what I do, because I want to build a little bit of tension in the dough, so I'm going to flour all around my dough and my hands. And I'm going to kind of pull it on my surface to create tension. And this is not kneading. You're not kneading your dough. You're just kind of pulling it and creating tension and more structure in your dough. I see some people do this. I see some people don't do this. I find it really works well because I find sometimes at this stage my dough is still missing some structure, some tension. It's still a little loose. Once you've got that done, you're going to pick it up. I pick it up with my bench scraper really gently below and just gently lay it inside my generously floured banneton. Then repeat the process. Once you have your bread inside your bannetons or your dish, you're going to want to again dust the top with some flour. And it can be brushed off if there's too much, but if it sticks to your containers, it's not going to go very well in the morning when you try to cook it. And now for the final step, all we need to do is place this inside of a bag. I just use a plastic bag, or if you have like a large Ziploc type bag as well, I close it tight and just kind of hold it with a twist tie closed. I've heard some people say that they just put it in the fridge without even putting it in a bag. It kind of creates like a skin on top and makes for a nice crust, but I've always put it in the fridge in the bag. I just find it's a little bit more hygienic. So if I look at the time, it's 7:30 at night. So I started this around I started this around, what time was it? 7 o'clock, feeding my starter, waiting the 4.5 hours. And so it's taken pretty much most of the day in small steps. There are guides out there that exist that kind of show you different ways to make sourdough bread based on your schedule. I don't know if you've ever seen Pro Home Cooks. He has like guides that you can download to actually fit making sourdough into the kind of work schedule that you have depending on what you do. So you can always check those out as well. For me, I'm going to pop these in the fridge and they'll be ready to cook tomorrow morning when I get up. The bread has proofed overnight, so now the fun starts. It's time to cook it. So I'm going to take it out of the fridge. And the first thing that we need to do is to check to make sure that it's ready to bake. There's a very sophisticated term used to see if your bread is ready for cooking, and it's called the poke test. To check if your bread is ready, you want to poke your bread with your finger. If it doesn't come up at all, that means that your bread is not proofed enough. It needs to sit a little bit longer. If your finger doesn't stay indented at all, it comes all the way back up, it may be a little overproofed. As you can see, my finger, it pops up somewhat, but it still stays indented. I just take the paper, put it on top, gently hold it, then flip it over, and slowly remove. Perfect. At this stage in the game, you want to always make sure that you're very gentle with your bread. You don't want to be rough with your bread and like burst the bubbles or deflate your dough is what I'm trying to say. You want to brush off any excess flour that you have. If you have a lot of flour on your parchment paper, be sure to dust that off as well so it doesn't burn while it's cooking. The next thing you're going to want to do is to score the top of your bread. This is going to allow for your bread to expand nicely while it's rising in the oven and not just tear all over the place. This is a razor blade. I bought it with a kit that I bought. I can link that below in the description. It came with the banneton baskets, and I got the blade and a bowl scraper and a bench scraper. Now all that's left to do is to bake our bread. My oven has been heating at 450. You should preheat your oven at that temperature for at least 30 to 45 minutes. And not only do you preheat your oven, you also have to put your baking dishes inside the oven as well. They need to be nice and hot. The recommended baking pans are Dutch ovens. Those seem to be what I see everywhere and what everybody seems to be using. So I do have some of those, and that's what's in the oven preheating. It's been at least, I want to say, probably close to an hour now that's all been heating at 450. So this is the temperature as well that I'm going to cook the bread. I have tried different temperatures based on different recommendations. Some say 500. When I baked mine at 500, the bottom of my bread burns. So 450 seems to be the sweet spot for me, but you know, you can be sure to test whatever temperature that seems to work for you. So now I'm going to put my bread in my piping hot dishes, trying to do this as quickly as I can so I don't lose too much heat from my oven. So now we cook this at 450 degrees for 20 minutes. Once your 20 minutes is up, do not open your oven. You're going to lower the heat to 425 and cook it an additional 10 minutes. I always find this part really exciting. We're not quite done the baking process yet, but this is where we get to take the cover off and see what our bread looks like. So now we're going to remove the cover, and then we just need to let it bake for another, this is going to be depending on everybody how dark you like your crust. It will just need to bake for another maybe 5 to 10 minutes just to darken that crust and to get it nice and crunchy. So let's see how our bread is coming along. So now you pop it back in your oven with the cover off at 425 for an extra maybe 5 to 8 minutes. Keep an eye on it. You want your crust to get dark, golden, crunchy. So it's going to depend on your oven as well. So just keep an eye on it and we're almost there. Here is loaf number 1 and loaf number 2. Now if you would like your bread darker, leave it longer. If you want it lighter, remove it sooner. You want to immediately take them out of your Dutch ovens. Be really careful not to burn yourself. Just do it by grabbing your parchment paper and taking it out. You just need to slide it off. There you go. Look at how beautiful this is. Now this is the hardest part in the entire sourdough making process. You have to let this cool completely before you can cut into your bread. I know it's tempting. There's nothing better than warm bread with butter melting on it and the crunch of the crust, but you have to do it. If you cut into it while it's warm, it's really going to affect like the texture and the final product of your loaf. But do stick around until the end and I will show you what the inside of my bread looks like. But if you want to hear, it's very crusty. It's hot. Oh, so I think it's pretty good, but it's very hot. I do hope you've enjoyed learning how to make sourdough bread from the biggest beginner bread maker you will ever encounter, and that it has shown you that you do not have to be an expert to make sourdough bread. You just need to run through the steps and anybody can make sourdough bread. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy my content. If you do, give it a big thumbs up. Don't be shy, hit that subscribe button and be sure to check back again soon to see what other content I will have coming out.